Welcome and thank you all for joining us today. I'm Nathan Dalbon, Housing Australia's Chief Executive Officer. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the different lands on which we all meet today, and would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present. I'm incredibly excited to be here today to speak to you about the implementation of the Government's Housing Australia Future Fund facility, the HAFF with an extra F, and the National Housing Accord facility, the NHAF. We have had more than 2,300 registration for today, which demonstrates the strong interest in these programs. Today you'll be hearing from the Honourable Julie Collins MP, Minister for Housing, Homelessness and Small Business, Carol Austin, Chair of Housing Australia's board, and from key Housing Australia representatives who will run through the programs and how we expect them to be implemented. The HAFF and the NHAF programs have the potential to provide profound and long-lasting change for our fellow Australians who need it most. We all understand the importance of secure and affordable accommodation and how it can transform people's lives. Housing Australia's purpose is to improve housing outcomes. These programs are designed with this important purpose front and centre. Further, we are not just focused on the short to medium term challenge of providing finance to support 40,000 dwellings over the next 5 years, but also on the longer term foundational platform for more sustainable growth in the social and affordable housing sector that can underpin investment in a new asset class in Australia. Some of the overarching principles we have attempted to reflect in the documents include balance. We are aiming to deliver housing across the country, whether it be big or small projects, regional, metro or remote communities. The key objectives include to deliver housing where it is needed most, including in Indigenous communities and other people in need. Second, collaboration. Together, the HAFF and the NHAF create an opportunity for collaboration and partnerships across all levels of government, private and community sectors to increase the supply of social and affordable housing. Third, accessibility. We have aimed to simplify the documentation and process to minimise cost and time to applicants. The Housing Australia portal, which has been developed for this program, aims to improve the interface between project opponents and Housing Australia and provide a streamlined online application process. In addition, this should enable a timely funding process with the objective of people living in new homes as soon as possible. Lastly, evidence. Using technology and data to provide a real-world evidence base to drive innovation and to inform what is most effective in shaping housing policy and delivering results on the ground. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our many stakeholders, including from the public, private and community sectors, for their engagement and feedback, which has helped shape this initiative. I'd like to thank our board for their valued guidance and the Housing Australia team for their work and commitment that has enabled us to reach this important milestone. I look forward to working with you to deliver on this opportunity to deliver much needed new housing supply. Thanks again for joining today, and I now hand over to our MC, Turi Condon, Chief Corporate Affairs Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. As Nathan mentioned, during today's information session, you will hear from the Honourable Julie Collins MP and Carol Austin, Chair of the Housing Australia Board. You will also hear from Housing Australia representatives, Lisa Marigliano, Director of Major Programs, Rowena Johnston, Chief Credit Officer, and Stuart Nielsen, Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer. The presentation will be followed by a Q&A panel session where we will be joined by John Ross, the Chief Origination Director, and Hugh Hardigan, Head of Research, Data and Analytics. Now, before we start, I'll briefly run through some housekeeping items. On the slide displayed are the interactive features of this webcast player. In the bottom right-hand corner are 3 small dots. Hovering the mouse over these dots will provide you with an option to ask a question and to access technical support if that's required. We'll take your questions at the end of today's presentation. And as part of our Q&A panel, however, I do encourage you to submit your questions at any time. If you do experience any technical difficulties during the webcast, please try refreshing your browser in the first instance. If you're still having issues, click Info to access the live chat support. Today's session is being recorded and will be published on the Housing Australia website early next week. Now, prior to the technical presentation, we have a message from the Minister.
Good afternoon. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and the custodians from the different lands on which we're joining this information session today. I also want to pay my respects to Elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nations peoples who are part of this session with us. 2024 will be an exciting year. It will be groundbreaking for social and affordable housing, particularly for funding in Australia. And I'd like to thank you for joining today's information session for the first round of funding for the Housing Australia Future Fund facility and the National Housing Accord facility. These two funding programs are key components of our ambitious housing reform agenda, which is working right across the board to address the housing challenges we face as a country. Housing Australia will select successful applicants and make offers of financial support around the middle of the year, with funding to be made available in the 24-25 financial year. This first round of funding is of course a significant milestone that marks the start of something big. The Housing Australia Future Fund that will help deliver 30,000 new social and affordable homes in the fund's first 5 years. It will provide housing support to remote Indigenous communities, to women and children leaving or experiencing domestic and family violence, to older women at risk of homelessness and veterans experiencing or at risk of homelessness. There's also the National Housing Accord. It was designed to ensure governments, investors and industry are moving in the same direction to increase housing supply. One of the immediate actions agreed to under the Accord, the Albanese Labor government committed to delivering a further 10,000 new affordable homes over the 5 years from 2024. So collectively, Housing Australia will be administering the fund facility and the Accord facility to support a total of 40,000 homes over the next 5 years. This is really important. The opening of applications for this funding round kickstarts the single biggest investment in social and affordable housing in more than a decade. This will help give more Australians a safe, affordable place to call home. Like all aspects of our housing agenda, success will be critical in terms of partnerships and co-investments. We want to forge stronger relationships with the community housing sector to provide more homes for more people. For the first time in decades, I'm pleased to say that this relationship is underpinned by certainty, with funding from the $10 billion investment there each and every year in perpetuity. And that the National Accord, of course, has the backing of National Cabinet, the states and industry. This type of certainty will help the sector not only plan ahead, but to attract private capital at scale. In forging stronger partnerships, we're breaking down the barriers to institutional investment and make housing a priority. Housing Australia will independently assess applications for the fund facility and the Accord facility in line with the government's investment mandate. This mandate sets out that the organisations that are eligible to apply for support include registered community housing providers, and organisations that are responsible for improving housing outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It of course also includes state and territory governments and agencies and local government bodies. The mandate also sets out the different types of financing that will be available. This will include long-term concessional loans and availability payments, and in some cases upfront capital grants. The mandate also deals with the distribution of funding. It will help ensure that no state or territory will miss out on the new rental homes supported by Housing Australia. It will also, of course, ensure that regional, rural and remote Australians benefit from the homes that are delivered. It has taken a lot of determination to reach this point, and I thank you for your support in it. The government has now delivered on its commitments to establish the Housing Australia Future Fund, strike the National Housing Accord and expand Housing Australia's remit. The work that will come to fruition in 2024. But of course, while this work is underway, we already have homes under construction following our decision to unlock the $575 million immediately from the National Housing Infrastructure Facility for more social and affordable homes. And we'll be adding a further $1 billion to be provided to this facility this financial year. We're also, of course, delivering the 4,000 new homes through the $2 billion Social Housing Accelerator payment that is already with the states and territories. And I know some of you are underway building today because of that. I want to thank you again for your interest in partnering with the Australian Government to provide more Australians with a safe, affordable place to call home. Thank you.
We would like to thank the Minister for providing this message today. I'd now like to introduce Carol Austin, Chair of the Housing Australia Board. Carol has a wealth of knowledge and experience in the finance industry and is also currently a Director of New South Wales State Super, the Grattan Institute and Info Exchange. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Turi. I'm delighted to join you this afternoon. As Chairman of the Board of Housing Australia, we're particularly pleased to be part of this launch. Housing Australia is a financial institution. We don't build houses. We can only achieve our goal and our mission by partnering with all of you. We thank you for your past support and we strongly encourage you to participate in this, the first funding round. In developing the application process, we had a number of considerations that we took into account. We wanted to make the process as inclusive as possible, and we hope we've done that. Other important considerations were cost and complexity. We know these projects can be very daunting, these application processes. So we sought to streamline it as much as possible and to introduce standard documents to reduce the costs of making applications. Now, this will be the first of several funding rounds that will take place over the next 5 years. We really encourage all of you to submit comments to help us improve the process, because we understand fundamentally that we partner with all of you to achieve our goals and our mission. I'd also like to, at this point, thank the Housing Australia staff for the work that they've done to complete this project against very tight deadlines. They've done a terrific job, and I really appreciate the work that they've done. So let me conclude by saying we recognise that we can only achieve our goals by partnering with you. We look forward to a very constructive, engaging process whereby we all help to provide greater accommodation for needed Australians. Thank you for your support.
Thank you, Carol. I'd now like to hand over to Lisa Marigliano, Director Major Programs, to provide a program overview.
Thank you, Turi. Good afternoon. My name's Lisa Marigliano. I'll be providing an outline of the Housing Australia Future Fund Facility, the HAFF, and the National Housing Accord Facility, the NHAF program, in particular funding round 1, including the eligibility requirements, the types of available funding, and how applications will be considered by Housing Australia. Next slide, please. So funding round 1, this is the first funding round for the HAFF and NHAF program. Over the 5-year program horizon, we expect to have multiple funding rounds, with a view to making funding commitments towards 40,000 new social and affordable homes. The information in today's session is focused on funding round 1, which opened on Monday the 15th of January. Future funding rounds may not be identical to the first. As this is a relatively unique program, we need to use the results and the market evidence from the first round to inform and shape the timelines and the frequency of future rounds. But of course, we recognise that there's a real benefit to being clear about the 5-year program so that you can have confidence to build a pipeline. So we will endeavour to work with industry and government over the course of this year to provide more detail on how the program is taking shape and how it will continue to roll out beyond round 1. The program has a number of objectives, which Housing Australia will balance when making funding decisions. And these objectives are to improve housing affordability in a sustainable way that addresses livability and housing need, to create settings that allow more investment by the private sector and encourage the growth of the community housing sector, including providers who improve housing outcomes for Indigenous Australians, to drive value for money through capital efficiency, to work with the states and territories to complement their housing programs, and to support longer-term positive change in workplace participation in the building and construction industry. For this first funding round, our priorities are clear: to commit funding towards projects that can deliver new housing as quickly as possible across the country, This priority has shaped this first funding round. We are targeting housing projects that are already completed, that are under construction, or that can start construction within 18 months of executing a funding agreement. There are no minimum project sizes and no narrow prescriptions on the types of projects and applicants, provided that they're eligible. Next slide, please. So who is eligible to apply for funding? In this program, the entities who are eligible to apply for funding are not-for-profit registered community housing providers. I'll use the abbreviation CHPs, but I appreciate they're also known as CHAs and CHOs in different states. Also not-for-profit entities whose primary purpose is to improve housing outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, or for current or former members of the Australian Defence Force, as well as the state and territory and local government. The way that other entities who aren't directly eligible, like builders, developers, other housing providers, financiers, investors, sponsors, suppliers, and other stakeholders, the way that they can participate is either by creating a special purpose vehicle with one of the eligible entities, for example, a joint venture between a developer or investor and a registered not-for-profit community housing provider. That SPV could apply for funding if the project is eligible. Alternatively, entities who aren't eligible to apply for funding themselves and don't want to or need to set up an SPV can collaborate or partner with one of the eligible entities. For example, where a developer sells new dwellings to a CHP, that CHP can apply for funding to support the viability of the housing outcomes if, of course, it's an eligible project. Next slide, please. So what type of funding is available? The purpose of the funding under the program is to support the viability of delivering and providing social and affordable housing, which by their nature are sub-market rent products. The funding will be made available for a 25-year term. It's well known that one of the key constraints to housing delivery, especially for charitable entities, is access to capital. Therefore, Housing Australia is offering no-interest concessional loans for up to 10% of the project cost to help charitable entities make up their capital stack in order to deliver or buy dwellings. In some circumstances, where more financial support is required, including for applicants with less than 75 dwellings across their applications, or in the case of regional projects, less than 150 dwellings, the no-interest concessional loan can be as high as 30% of the project cost if they choose to. The other type of funding is availability payments, which all eligible applicants can apply for. Availability payments are an ongoing government-backed income source to help close the gap between the commercial cost of buying or developing and operating housing and the revenues received through rent and Commonwealth rental assistance. It's up to applicants to determine the quantum of availability payments that they'll need to close this gap in their project. The amount will naturally be different for social and affordable housing, which applicants can describe in their application. Due to the competitive nature of the funding process, efficiency of funding is very important to us. This doesn't always mean the lowest cost. It means the best value for money, having regard to other things like the type of dwelling, the area, the proposed resident cohort, and the way that the project addresses housing need in that area. All of the costs and revenues in a project, including the proposed availability payment and concessional loan, will need to be reflected in a financial model as part of an application. A pro forma financial model has been provided in the Housing Australia portal, which applicants can use for guidance when submitting their application, or they can use their own financial model. Ultimately, Housing Australia is interested in achieving value for money and an efficient funding outcome. Applicants who are successful will be paid the availability payment quarterly over the 25-year term, which will be indexed annually, provided that the dwellings are continually made available for social and affordable housing over the term. Applicants will need to determine the rest of the capital stack and the sources of funding and finance for their project themselves. If they are eligible, they can apply for Housing Australia's Affordable Housing Bond Aggregator, AHBA debt. Otherwise, they can use their own funds, borrow from banks and other lenders, collaborate with investors and sponsors, or even apply any co-funding where it's available from local, state, territory or Commonwealth government. Capital grants can't be applied for in this funding round. However, Housing Australia might elect, in very exceptional circumstances, to give an applicant an upfront capital grant This could be if the proposed housing outcomes meet a high need, but the project is extremely financially challenging. For example, housing in remote areas, housing for high need or particularly vulnerable cohorts, or housing for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The funding is provided for 25 years. So what happens at the end of the term? Well, firstly, the availability payments will stop. If you're a charitable entity with a no interest concessional loan, the loan will become repayable in full at the end of the 25 years. And this can be funded by selling the property, refinancing with another lender, or some other means. The dwellings may be retained or they may be sold. If they are retained for a use other than social or affordable housing, or if they're sold, we do expect to see that the interests of the tenants are looked after in some form of stable long-term housing, and also that there is an ongoing financial benefit retained within the social and affordable housing system. For example, through financial benefits to a charitable housing entity or through ongoing reinvestment and supply. At a portfolio level, Housing Australia will seek to prioritise projects which contribute to the development of the community housing sector, including through the provision of ongoing benefits. Next slide, please. So what type of housing are eligible for funding? Any type of dwellings that are capable of being used for social or affordable housing can be eligible. In terms of delivery, the dwellings must be new. They must be either completed and not yet lived in, or under construction, or soon to commence construction. Because speed, supply and certainty are important to us in this first funding round, we expect that projects must be at least preparing to lodge a building planning or development application, and therefore must be ready to start construction by no later than 18 months after we enter into a funding contract. In terms of dwelling use, they must be made available for the whole of the 25-year term as social and affordable housing. Social housing means dwellings provided at a rent calculated as a proportion of household income, which is typically 25 to 30%, and in accordance with state or territory policies on CHP provided social housing with respect to tenant eligibility and rent settings. Affordable housing means dwellings rented for 74.9% or less of the market rent for that dwelling to households meeting the income eligibility limits. These limits are defined in the Call for Applications documentation. They are essentially the median equivalised household incomes from the Australian Bureau of Statistics in each state and territory, and distinguished by reference to metropolitan and regional areas. Affordable housing does often cater for key workers, but not in all circumstances. The definition of affordable housing that we're using is being adopted in the first funding round. It may, however, evolve over time in future funding rounds as a result of ongoing work at a state and Commonwealth level, which might result in a uniform or national definition. Next slide, please. So the requirements for how dwellings need to be delivered are: they need to be well located, close to transport, local services, education opportunities, and otherwise have access to amenity. They need to be well designed and aligned to housing need. Social and affordable housing can be part of mixed tenure developments that include private and other housing types. In respect of the National Construction Code, for projects where a development or a building application is lodged after the 1st of October 2023, the dwellings must be compliant with the NCC in relation to energy efficiency, that is, 7 stars or otherwise the highest rating reasonably possible, and also in relation to livable housing design, that is, silver level. So that's the case for projects with DAs lodged after the 1st of October 2023, regardless of whether or not those aspects of the NCC apply in that state or territory. In respect of builder accreditation, if Housing Australia is directly or indirectly providing an amount of funding that is higher than the specified financial thresholds towards building works, then the builder, the head contractor of the dwellings, must be accredited under the Federal Work Health and Safety Scheme. More detailed information on this particular topic will be provided beyond this session. Finally, one of the government's aims is to promote more participation and retention of female apprentices in the building and construction industry. In this program, applicants are encouraged to consider how they could promote greater apprenticeship participation, although adopting targets is not mandatory. Apart from the things I've just mentioned, Housing Australia is otherwise not prescribing any specifications for eligible dwellings. it will be up to the applicant to demonstrate that the proposed dwellings are suitable in the local context for the proposed tenant cohort and that they meet housing need. In this funding round, applicants can put forward projects of any size. They can put forward one project or multiple projects. We will consider a portfolio of projects if there are benefits to that applicant of aggregating a group of projects or sites. Beyond delivery, applicants will also need to provide their tenancy and asset management strategies to demonstrate that quality housing outcomes will be provided over the 25-year term and that tenants' needs can be properly met. There is a range of project delivery and commercial structures that would be suitable for the program. As I mentioned earlier, it is possible for eligible applicants to buy new dwellings that are either off the plan or already completed. For example, a registered CHP could enter into a contract with a developer to purchase a number of dwellings that the CHP will then use for social or affordable housing. That CHP might apply for a no-interest concessional loan to assist with the purchase price and availability payments to subsidise the ongoing operational costs for 25 years. It's also possible for eligible applicants to deliver dwellings themselves. In that case, a CHP might apply for a no-interest concessional loan to assist with construction costs and also availability payments to subsidise their operations. A further example is a state or local government providing land to a CHP and potentially a development partner for housing to be delivered. And then the CHP retains either a freehold or leasehold interest in the dwellings and applies for availability payments to subsidise operations for the social and affordable dwellings. Next slide, please. So how will Housing Australia assess applications and provide funding? Applications in funding round 1 will be assessed against a clear set of evaluation criteria in order to select the projects which best demonstrate value for money broadly. Applicants will need to demonstrate, firstly, that they are eligible and that their project is compliant with the specified requirements. They'll need to demonstrate that the project achieves Housing Australia's policy and program requirements. For example, it meets housing need and is well located and well designed. They'll need to demonstrate that their project is financially feasible. Funding sources are identified and the capital structure is optimised. They'll need to outline their approach to managing planning and construction risk, demonstrate that the dwellings can be delivered on time, and that their 25-year tenancy and asset management strategy is sound. They'll need to demonstrate the experience and capability of the relevant project participants. And finally, they'll need to satisfy Housing Australia that their commercial structure is appropriate and indicate their acceptance of the commercial and risk framework. Once the successful projects are selected, applicants will be notified around the middle of this year. A funding commitment from Housing Australia will be made by executing funding documents, which outline the commercial and the legal terms of the arrangement over the 25-year term. The funding documents are standardised, which means they should be equally applicable to all manner of project types and funding arrangements. This should reduce applicants' legal costs because we are not expecting to have lots of departures bid back through the application phase or to have extensive or bespoke negotiations down the track. To ensure that the standardised documents are reasonable, bankable and market tested, we've made the drafts available for early consultation. The draft funding documents were made available in December last year, and feedback can be provided on the legal terms by next Monday, the 22nd of January. Anyone interested can head to the Housing Australia website for a link to the data room where they can be downloaded. After the feedback is collected and considered, we expect to provide the final version of the funding documents in the Housing Australia portal in February for use in this funding round 1. Next slide, please. So the key dates. Funding round 1 is open for 10 weeks between 15 January and 22 March 2024. Applicants will need to lodge their applications by 2 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time on the 22nd of March. During that 10-week application period, we'll also be providing a series of more technical information sessions for potential applicants who are interested. These will be online starting in early February, and we'll send out a notification to people registered in the Housing Australia portal. Once the 10-week application period closes, we will evaluate the applications, which will take around 10 to 12 weeks. and we'll also be obtaining government funding approvals in parallel. We expect to then notify successful and unsuccessful applicants about the result around mid-year. Funding documents will then be executed with successful applicants. Depending on the nature of each project, whether they involve construction, acquisition, or management, or any combination, the funding will start to flow as required from financial year 24-25. So I will now pass to Rowena Johnson, Housing Australia's Chief Credit Officer, to provide an outline of the Affordable Housing Bond Aggregator, senior debt, which registered CHPs can apply for, separately to the funding that I've just described under the HAFF and NHAF programs. Next slide, please. Over to you, Rowena.
Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon. My name is Rowena Johnston and I'm the Chief Credit Officer at Housing Australia. Today I will be talking to you about the senior debt offering that Housing Australia has designed and will make available to complement the HAFF and NHAF programs that Lisa has just described to you. Next slide, please. I will describe to you the senior debt products that are available, the process of application, the role of the Housing Australia portal, the way your application will interact with the HAFF and NHAF programs, the timing and process you can expect, and finally, how to incorporate senior debt from a finance provider other than Housing Australia. Next slide, please. Housing Australia, formerly the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation, has been providing senior debt to the community housing sector since our inception in 2018. We offer loans and grants across two funding programs, being the Affordable Housing Bond Aggregator, or AHBA, and the National Housing Infrastructure Facility, or NHIF. As part of the design and implementation of the HAFF and NHAF programs, Housing Australia have designed loan products that have specific features and application processes that will harmonise with program participation. These program-specific loans will be offered on terms that should allow the availability payments to maximise the efficacy of the senior debt component of the capital stack for projects. The terms and conditions of these loans are predetermined with standardised inclusions and standardised documentation. These terms and conditions and the features of the loan products are contained in our loan product statements. These statements are available through the Housing Australia portal and are detailed with covenants, security requirements, and structuring components, including key terms and conditions. Housing Australia is offering senior debt products for the construction and/or operational phases of projects. You may also avail yourselves of our AHBA guidelines and our NHIF guidelines that will carefully explain the debt available through Housing Australia and the features of these funding lines. Next slide, please. When you are applying for program participation through the Housing Australia portal, you will be asked if you would like also to apply for senior debt with Housing Australia. If you indicate that you are applying for senior debt, you will be prompted to upload information requirements and answer questions that are required to support your debt application. These are comprehensive but clear and listed, and will also include requirements to complete the financial model and to upload important statements and information that will aid your application. It is imperative that all information supporting your debt application is uploaded through the Housing Australia portal. Whilst the information will be manually reviewed and due process followed for your debt application, all information will be stored, monitored, and decisioned through the portal. Similarly, any questions that the Housing Australia team has about your application, including requests for further information or for clarification, will be sent through the Housing Australia portal. Therefore, we implore you to use this as your sole source of communication during the debt application process. In order to allow equitable and fair access to the programs and associated debt, all applicants must have access to the same information and be subject to the same processes so that separate inquiries via phone or email cannot be answered. The pro forma financial model is a compulsory component of the application and must be completed for senior debt applications. Comprehensively completing your application accurately will positively enhance your application and its ability to be assessed expeditiously, as will your responsiveness to questions or clarifications sent to you through the Housing Australia portal. Next slide, please. Applications for Housing Australia Senior Debt supporting HAFF and NHAF projects opened on Monday the 15th of January and will close at 2 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time on Monday the 22nd of March. I would like to note here that applications for senior debt will be processed and assessed by a team separate from the HAFF and NHAF program team, and that the senior debt process is separate and independent to the decisioning of program applications. The Housing Australia debt teams will process all applications as expeditiously as possible, with a view to ensuring that all complete and eligible applications are decisioned to align timing with approvals of the HAFF and NHAF program participation. Successful applications will move as quickly as possible thereafter from approval to execution and to settlement. Next slide, please. Housing Australia recognised that applicants to the HAFF and NHAF programs may wish to use other forms of senior debt, and we absolutely encourage this. There is no advantage or disadvantage to your HAFF or NHAF application in using Housing Australia senior debt funding. If you are using senior debt from another provider, you will need to indicate this in your program application, and at that time you will be prompted to provide some relevant information to support this. Housing Australia also recognised that construction funding may be separately arranged through another financier, with a view to refinancing that debt upon practical completion of construction with Housing Australia. For that reason, and to aid structuring and efficiency with construction funders, Housing Australia will make available some likely and standard requirements for operational phase debt takeout debt. Next slide, please. On the basis that the Housing Australia portal is central to the applications for both program participation and senior debt applications, I will pass to our CFO and COO, Stuart Nielsen, to provide further detail on the portal. Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks, Ro, and good afternoon, everyone. My name's Stuart Nielsen. As Ro mentioned, the Housing Australia portal, or HAFF, as we call it, is central to the way applicants will interface with Housing Australia to apply for funding. The portal will be a one-stop shop that contains all the information you'll need to apply for and submit an application under the HAFF and NHAF. And of course, the portal is also used for Housing Australia's existing products offered under the Affordable Housing Bond Aggregator and the National Housing Infrastructure Facility. Next slide, please. In this brief presentation today, I will cover how to register for an account, what are the key features of the portal, who will be able to access the portal, and what to do if you need assistance with the portal. But all the information I'm providing today is available on the Housing Australia website or on the portal, so please look there if you need any more detail. Next slide, please. So to access the portal is a two-step process. The first step is to sign up for an account, which you can do by following the link in our website. To sign up, you'll need an email address and an Australian mobile number so we can authenticate your access to the portal. Next slide, please. The second step is to complete the registration details. So for example, we need to know the entity name, ABN, type of entity, location, etc. Once all the registration details have been completed, you click on Create Account. That registration request comes into Housing Australia to validate. And once validated, you'll receive an email from Housing Australia confirming your registration. This will give you full access to the portal. Now, we've already received and approved a large number of registration requests. However, some have been incomplete, which has required Housing Australia staff to request the missing information, which can slow down the registration process. So the tip is, the more complete your registration details are, the faster we can process your request. Next slide, please. So full access, what does that mean? Well, full access means you can access all the features of the portal and download all the documents, including the call for applications, the reportable schedules, and the financial model that Lisa's already talked through. Once applicants have entered all the information required, they can then upload all the necessary documents to the portal to submit an application. The portal has a Q&A facility for applicants where they can submit a question to Housing Australia. There are various guidelines and how-to guides available to assist applicants. There are also links to FAQs, web guidance, and tooltips. So there's hover text, for example, so that within the portal, if there's a particular question, you can hover over that and it explains what is needed for that particular question. The portal has also been designed to make it as easy as possible for applicants by following a logical flow. That is, depending on the type of organisation you are or the type of funding you require, the portal will direct you to the appropriate questions specific to your application. Next slide, please. So the portal is available to eligible applicants, as Lisa has already covered, to submit a funding application. But the key documents are also available via downloads page to other participants in the sector. So what are the key takeaways? You must complete and submit the registration details to access the portal. Should you need help, there's a dedicated support line available by calling 0289251800, and applicants can also submit a question to the Housing Australia website via the Q&A facility on the portal. The other thing that we're doing is preparing a video demonstration, effectively a how-to guide for applicants to assist them in completing the application form, and that will be made available shortly on the portal as well. So I might hand back to Turi.
Okay. Thank you, Stuart, and thank you to our presenters. We'll now move to the Q&A component of the information session. Please submit your questions by clicking on the 3 dots in the lower right corner of your screen. If you don't get your question answered today, we'll collect feedback and provide an updated list of frequently asked questions on the Housing Australia website. On our panel today, we have Nathan Dalbon, CEO, Housing Australia, Stuart Nielsen, CFO and COO, Rowena Johnston, Chief Credit Officer, Lisa Marigliano, our Major Programs Director, John Ross, Chief Origination Director, Hugh Hardigan, Head of Research, Data and Analytics. Now, let me look at the questions. I'll direct our first question to Lisa. Lisa, does Housing Australia have any targets on how many of the 40,000 it is hoping to meet in round 1?
Thanks, Terry. That's a good question. Look, in round 1, we're looking to fund as many dwellings as possible within the funding envelope. Ultimately, we need to ensure that we get housing supply unlocked quickly and in many areas as possible.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Now, we have a question I'd like to direct to Hugh. Hugh, the call for applications says Housing Australia will assess housing needs. How is Housing Australia going to do that, is the question.
Thanks, Turi. And look, Lisa and Nathan have alluded to this briefly, but look, essentially what we're asking for is for project proponents to bring forward as much information as they can on their actual projects. I think Housing Australia, we don't pretend to understand every particular sort of intricacy around housing need in any particular localised area. So we'd encourage anyone, all project proponents, to draw on whatever data they can, and certainly in our consultations with states, they have said they're going to make some data available as well. In terms of what Housing Australia's role is in this process, we'll provide more a validation type role. So we'll accumulate all the information provided by project proponents in returnable schedules, and then we'll look at publicly available data such as rental stress, homelessness, and those types of metrics to essentially play that validation role. Thanks, Turi.
Thanks, Hugh. Lisa, I think this one's back to you. Do projects need to already have development consent to be eligible for funding in round 1?
Oh, thanks, Terry. Look, no, projects don't need to already have a development consent in place in order to be eligible for funding in round one. So to be eligible, projects need to either be completed, that is new and not lived in, or under construction, or ready to start construction by no later than 18 months after we execute a funding agreement with a successful applicant. So that means we expect applicants at the outermost to at least be ready to lodge their DA. Anything prior to that is not really eligible.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Please remember to send your questions through the Q&A, and please, panelists, feel free to add any value if you think to any of these questions. Now, Stuart, I think this is one for you. Are stakeholders able to assess or access and download the documents from the portal if they're not an eligible applicant?
Thanks, Julie. Yes, they can. Only eligible applicants can actually get all the way through the portal to lodge an application, but there is a download page available where other interested parties can download documents to be able to, if they are helping particular applicants. So yes, there's a download facility available, but they'll be able to get those documents.
Okay. I think another one for you, Stuart. How can an applicant know the status of their application, and can it be changed after it's been submitted?
Yeah, good question. The portal actually has flags on progress. So there's only 2 flags at this stage. One's in progress and the other is submitted. So if it's in progress, you can obviously continue to make changes to it. If it's submitted, then it's been lodged with Housing Australia for assessment. So I think the other question was, can you change it after you have submitted?
It was.
Technically, you can change your application at any time before the closing window of that 2 p.m. on the 22nd of March, 2024. But you'll need to submit a request via our Q&A facility on the portal to be able to do so.
Okay. Thanks, Stuart. And I think Lisa looks like she's popular today. This one looks for you. Does Housing Australia have a set maximum availability payment for social and affordable housing? Thank you, Lisa.
Okay. Yeah, look, there is no set maximum availability payment for either social or affordable housing. So given that we're trying to fund a total of 40,000 dwellings within a funding envelope over 5 years, the competitive process is designed to ensure that we can achieve value for money. So applicants are obviously encouraged to optimise the capital structure for their projects, bid the most efficient availability payment. Part of our evaluation will be to test the financial viability of each project and assess that availability payment against our internal benchmarks. And these internal benchmarks are based on particular dwelling types within particular geographical areas.
Okay, thank you. Well, I have you. I'll ask another question. Lisa, is there a requirement for the housing to be sold to a government body after the contract term?
Oh, no. There's no requirement for the housing to be sold to a government body after the 25 years. There will be an obligation for the dwellings to be made available and used as social and affordable housing for the whole of the 25-year term. But at the end of the term, it is up to the property owner to work out what to do with the property. Having said that, though, as I mentioned in the briefing session, if the owner doesn't continue to use the dwellings for social and affordable housing, so if they change the use or if they sell them, there will be an obligation to firstly look after the tenants. So the tenants need to be somehow kept in ongoing stable accommodation, and we will be providing a test for that through the contract documentation, and also to demonstrate that there will be an ongoing benefit to the social and affordable housing system if the properties are sold.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to senior debt. So I have a question for Rowena. Can we vary the standard loan terms and conditions for specific projects?
Thanks, Turi. The short answer is yes, you can. We've tried to design the terms and conditions in a way that is appealing and suitable for as many applicants as possible. However, we will allow departures from those terms and conditions by application. As with all aspects of your senior debt application, that will be subject to assessment and approval, but we are absolutely willing to consider departures where they're absolutely imperative for the success of the project.
Okay. Rowena, another question. When will the standardised loan legal documentation be available?
Thanks, Terry. The legal documentation has been drafted and is under review at the moment, and we anticipate that to be available in early March. We may run a consultation process, but at the moment the release date is looking like early March, and certainly in time before the close for applications for senior debt.
Okay, thank you. Nathan, there's a question on the timing of the next round. If an applicant is not quite ready to apply in the first round, when do you envisage the second round kicking off?
Thanks, Terry. Look, at this stage, the timing of the second round hasn't been determined. As others have mentioned, we do anticipate there to be multiple rounds. One of the things we're anticipating following this round would be to have a review in terms of how the process went and what we saw in terms of the projects that came forward. Take into consideration those learnings, obviously consult with government, and then come back to market with what we anticipate would be the timing.
Thanks, Nathan. We have another program question, so I'll come back to Lisa. It's on capital grants. What should an applicant do if they have a project that they think has exceptional circumstances, but they can't apply for a capital grant?
Thanks, Terry. So as I mentioned in the briefing, capital grants can't be applied for in this funding round, but as I've mentioned, we do have a limited discretion in exceptional circumstances to provide capital grants for projects that really need them, because they're extremely financially challenging, but also because they deliver really important outcomes. So that is not for projects that just because they're expensive, that's not what the capital grants are for. The projects need to actually address an exceptionally high need or a particularly vulnerable cohort. So one example is housing in remote areas, or even housing in Indigenous communities. So if there's applicants with projects that sort of fulfil that brief, we'd encourage applicants to submit an application based on an availability payment and a no interest concessional loan if they choose to. And if the project otherwise meets the eligibility criteria and the evaluation criteria, we would engage with that applicant to better understand the project. And subject to funding being available, we'd be able to help them optimise their financial structure by potentially providing an upfront capital grant instead of the availability payment or concessional loan, if that does better support the viability of that project.
Thanks, Lisa. Some of those comments segue into a question for Hugh. Hugh, what is meant by an equitable distribution of housing referred to in the documents?
Yeah, good question, Turi. So this is outlined from the government in the investment mandate. So where we receive our directions from government, they've said they want to see an equitable distribution of dwellings. I think Nathan referred to this in his remarks as a balance, a good balance, which I think is a good way to describe it. So that would be across sort of regional, remote and metro areas. It's worth keeping in mind that the government has already committed to a baseline in each state and territory. So that's 1,200 dwellings. But Housing Australia will, as part of the evaluation process, be seeking out as equitable distribution of projects across the country based on value for money projects that come in. So that's probably about it, Turi.
Okay, thanks. We might just go back to Stuart. There's a question on the portal. Stuart, does the portal let an applicant submit a portfolio application?
Yes, it does. So applications for funding on the portal are like at a project level. So a project can have one or many sites that are added to it. So again, that's one of the features of the portal. We're trying to make it easier for applicants by aggregating at a project level. So yes.
Okay. I might just go to John. John, is an applicant's HAFF and NHAF application more likely to succeed if they also ask for a bond aggregator loan?
Thanks, Terry. I think Ro might have touched on this point, but the answer is no. So there's no advantage to an applicant applying for or thinking that they need to apply for an ABBA loan as well. And in fact, we're actively encouraging proponents to arrange their own debt if that's what they want to do. So you're welcome to use either. You can make the application or you can bring your own debt to the process.
Okay. Lisa, I might just come back to you. There's a question here. Is the evaluation process just about the lowest cost projects, or will Housing Australia be looking at the quality of design?
Well, look, obviously we'll be assessing the funding that's requested from a financial perspective, as I sort of mentioned earlier. The offers do need to be financially competitive, firstly to ensure that we can fund as many dwellings as possible within the funding envelope, but also to ensure that we're achieving value for money for the government's investment. But value for money is really broad. We consider it through a range of evaluation criteria, which I kind of stepped through in the presentation. And one of those criteria is a consideration of whether the dwellings are well located. And that is, they need to be close to transport, education if that's relevant, employment if that's relevant to the particular cohort of tenants, and also services. So the dwellings need to be located in a way that demonstrates that they do have amenity, but also they need to be well designed. And there's some information in the call for applications document which goes into a little more detail about what well-designed means and what our expectations are for people to demonstrate to us that dwellings are well-designed. So quality of design, yes, it's something that we will be taking into account in addition to the financial components and the other aspects of the proposals.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Hugh, I might just come back to you. There's a question here. What reporting obligations will successful applicants have, and where will these be described?
Thanks, Tori. Well, again, I refer back to the government's investment mandate. They've put quite extensive reporting obligations on us, as would be expected with such a big program. So this includes things like sort of where projects are located, how many dwellings, what topology, etc. Including also sort of us being able to sort of update the government on construction milestones, and then also us being able to sort of monitor compliance once dwellings are sort of up and operational. So we did attach, I think, a summary table in the funding document that should be publicly available. Hopefully people have seen that. That gives a fair degree of guidance as the types of data points we'll be seeking, not just through the portal, but in different stages of the program through construction and then operational stages. But happy for people to get in touch with us if they want to ask additional questions on that, Turi, as well. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Hugh. I'll just come back to Stuart on the portal. Stuart, the question is, in the portal, can an applicant be working on multiple applications at the same time?
Yes, you don't have to fully complete and submit an application before you start another application. So you can be working on multiple applications at the same time. One of the features of the portal is that it lets you save where you're up to on a particular application, and then you can return at a later point to continue. So you could have multiple applications at the same time at various stages. It's only when you submit the application that it actually comes into Housing Australia for assessment. So yes, multiple applications and multiple projects.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. We have a few questions that are around the difference between the HAFF and the NHAF. I might just go to Lisa and ask if you can pull out maybe some of the major differences, Lisa.
Well, essentially they're being run by Housing Australia as a single program. The HAFF is intending to support 30,000 social and affordable homes, whereas the NHAF is intending to support 10,000 affordable homes. So as far as applicants are concerned, it shouldn't necessarily present a difference to them as to which program they're being funded through. Overall, the entirety of the program collectively will support the delivery of 20,000 social and 20,000 affordable homes. So hopefully that's a clear answer.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here, I think again for Lisa, around the adaptive reuse of dwellings. Lisa, would existing or mothballed residential, aged care and nursing homes or retirement villages converted to social and affordable housings qualify for the HAFF or NHAF?
One of the eligible categories of housing or projects is the conversion of properties to residential dwellings. I think that that's a relatively technical question, so I think it's something that we'll need to take it on notice and potentially answer through the Housing Australia portal as an FAQ.
Thanks, Lisa. There's one here also, again, for you, I think. Is it mandatory to use the pro forma financial model?
No, it's not. So we have provided a pro forma financial model for a number of reasons, because we need to collect information in a way that's consistent so that we can assess it in a way, of course, that is consistent. It may be useful for many applicants who choose to use it. There will be some applicants who would prefer to use their own for a range of reasons. So it's not mandatory to use the pro forma financial model. Although having said that, it may be that if an applicant is applying for senior debt through the Affordable Housing Bond Aggregator at the same time as they're also intending to apply for availability payments through the HAFFF and NHAF program, they may need to complete parts of the pro forma model, because the information that's collected will then be used by different parts of Housing Australia to make the credit assessment application at the same time as the availability payment assessment.
Okay, thanks. I think I'll just do one more for you and then we'll try someone else. Again, this might be a little bit technical, but it's a stock clarification. So, Lisa, can you provide a clarification on whether new stock includes knockdown and rebuild of an existing residential dwelling, where the stock's not currently a community housing asset?
Okay. Well, a knockdown rebuild would be eligible because it would be the construction of new housing. So at that level, yes, there's no question around eligibility. However, at a portfolio level, we are, as a program objective, intending to increase supply. So we'll be looking at that sort of at a portfolio level. The projects that have the greatest impact on supply obviously may demonstrate more benefits to the program than those which just replace a single dwelling for a dwelling. But at a project level, yes, they would be eligible.
Okay. Thanks, Lisa. And I'll just go to Rowena if I could. Rowena, in relation to capital funding options, what are the senior debt application restrictions? Are they the same as the HAFF, 10% of capital costs, or are they different?
Thanks, Turi. So the criteria and the eligibility for senior debt are usual for senior debt in the market and usual for Housing Australia products. They're not necessarily linked to the HAFF and NHAF eligibility criteria. This is a separate and independent product that is designed to complement and support the capital stack. So it would need to qualify usual credit assessment criteria, including capacity to borrow, ability to repay, and servicing and so forth, that are normal for a senior debt style facility.
Okay. Does Housing Australia have a guide to the sizing of the availability payment in dollars per annum for each of the social housing and affordable dwellings? Does this vary depending on the location of the development? That sounds like more for you, Lisa. You're just on mute.
Of course. So the question was, do we have a guide for the sizing of availability payments?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
basically.
No, we don't. We haven't necessarily provided a guide for the sizing. We do encourage applicants to size the availability payments themselves based on the level of subsidy that will be required to support the viability of their project. As I mentioned, the availability payments will be tested against our benchmarks that we've developed internally that will be based on the project typology. So if it is, the dwelling typology. So, for example, a one-bedroom unit as opposed to a three-bedroom house. So it will be specific to dwelling typology in particular geographical areas, and we'll do so at an SA4 statistical level.
Thank you. We have some questions also just on applications. So, Stuart, I'll come back to you now. Is there a limit on how many people from a CHP can register on the portal?
No, there's no limit. So we would expect a number of individuals from within the organisation. As I mentioned at the outset, what you need for registration is an email and a mobile number to authenticate. But there can be many people from an organisation that can register under the portal.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, I might just come back to you for a moment if I could. The question is eligibility for concessional loans tied to eligibility for availability payments?
Okay, so in order to apply for a concessional loan, you must also apply for an availability payment. All of the entities who I explained in the briefing session all of the eligible entities may apply for an availability payment, but only a subset of those entities may also apply for a concessional loan. So it's only the charitable entities who will be eligible to apply for the no interest concessional loan. And they are the registered community housing providers who are also registered charities, as well as the housing providers or the entities whose primary purpose is to improve housing outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander entities and for current and former members of the Australian Defence Force.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have a question here that I think Hugh could answer. Can you explain what constitutes affordable housing?
Yes, thanks, Turi. And look, I think it's probably worth flagging with obviously all project proponents that, you know, we had to balance multiple objectives in setting this definition, and principally the objectives is making sure we could deliver significant rent relief to as many households as possible, but whilst also preserving as much project viability within the scheme. So that was really kind of what drove us in setting the definition. It's worth saying we did have considerable consultations with the states and territories on this. We have drawn a lot from some of the definitions that exist at the state and territory level, those that do have policies in place. But look, in a nutshell, Lisa alluded to this as well, rent must be set at 70.9% of market rent or less, which will in and of itself provide significant rent relief. We've also spelled out that applicants should have regard to the affordability of rents, and anything that goes beyond that 74.9% will be looked at quite positively through our housing needs assessment in the program. There's also a tenant eligibility component of that, and I think that was outlined in the CFA document. So income thresholds set at medium incomes for all different household types. So people should have a look at that. And I think Lisa also alluded to the fact that there is this broader state and territory process that's ongoing. They may come to an agreement at some stage, and obviously that would be considered for future rounds as well. Thanks, Turi.
Thanks, Hugh, and thank you to all those watching for their questions. And we really appreciate these. We're running towards time, but also, if I could note that if you have further questions, we'll take them on notice and provide an updated list of frequently asked questions on the Housing Australia website as soon as we can. As mentioned earlier, a recording of today's information session will be made available on the Housing Australia website early next week. We hope that you have found today's information session helpful. As always, you can reach out to Housing Australia with additional questions. Over the course of the application period, Housing Australia will also release any necessary addendum to the Call for Applications document through the Housing Australia portal. On behalf of Housing Australia and our speakers, thank you for your interest in the HAFF and NHAF programs, and thank you for joining us today.